Hello, welcome to Macroeconomics with McConnell, Brood, and Flynn. We're going into Chapter 3, Supply, Demand, and the Market Equilibrium. Excuse me. As always, this is not meant to replace any reading of a chapter if you're doing this for a class. We're also just going to follow along the slides that are available, and I'll be also following along in your textbook. Remember to actually do any exercises and additional work provided for you by your instructor in your class. And with that, let us begin. In this chapter, we're going to talk about some of the key areas supply, demand, how they meet, what happens when they cross over. That would be our equilibrium. Any changes in supply and demand will change where they meet, which is known as equilibrium. And we will end talking about how government sets prices, good, bad, and ugly as it relates to that. First off, markets. What is a market? A market basically is when anything between a buyer and a seller. Generally, it works best if there is a large number of buyers and sellers. They act independently, and no one large buyer and no one large seller can influence the market. You can do this on a local level, that might be a food or a farmer's market, nationally or internationally, and prices will reflect that. The best description of international markets is crude oil. Prices changing all the time, and that's based on supply and demand. We'll be using that as an example for this chapter. There are others in the book, but we'll just use that because it's something common to most people. Now, this is a key chapter for economic theory. This is what could be considered the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. You're keeping that in mind. What do we mean by demand? Demand is based upon two simple premises: what the average consumer is willing and able to pay for. Once again, what an average consumer is willing and able to pay for. All things being equal, ceteris paribus again, we're going to start with an individual market and build those up together to create an aggregate. If you're not willing and able to purchase something, you don't have a demand for it. The law of demand is an inverse relationship. By that it means as the price of a good or service rises, you will want less of it. As the price of a good or service falls, the overall demand should increase. Cup of coffee at Starbucks. If it is $4, you might buy a cup. If it's $5, you may not. If it's $3 or $2, you might get a large and a small. So you've been doing this most of your life. If you've been buying anything, it is based upon the price. As the price changes, so will your demand habits. Sometimes it acts as an obstacle. Again, if coffee is $10, it's an obstacle. If gasoline is $10 a gallon, it's an obstacle. Law of diminishing returns, marginal utility, How much pleasure or satisfaction are you satisfying some desire out of each unit? As the cost goes up, your margin will shrink. It's also based on a couple of simple premises. One being how much you have as far as an income, and is there a substitute? And we're on page 47 in your textbook. The more you have as far as an income, the more you're willing to spend on a particular good. If you make $10 an hour, you may not spend that much. If you make $500,000 a year, you might be willing to spend a little bit more on that imported caviar. The substitute is that will affect whether or not you purchase something. Is there something equivalently good that you're willing to buy? Don't take any offense, but let's say for the sake of argument, Pepsi and Coke are equally acceptable to you. You could care less. Then you would buy the one that is cheaper. That is the substitute effect. Usually it's something that you could replace one good for another and still get the same utility out of it. This is a graphic representation of the demand curve. The units that will be demanded will increase as the price decreases. And you see we're talking about gasoline. As the price drops, you're more likely to buy a larger vehicle which will consume more fuel. As the price goes up, you're less likely to buy a larger vehicle. You're not going to consume more gas if you're not changing the car. You go to work, you may hang out with your friends, that's about it. If the price starts to increase, you perhaps may not go out as much, or now you're carpooling. So that will affect it. But primarily through recent history in the automobile field, if the price of gasoline is relatively cheap, that will have a determining factor on the type of car you buy. This, when we graph these out and we connect them, this is called a demand curve. You remember anything about math and geometry? This is an XY axis. Y is P going up. X is Q, or quantity. That is the horizontal line. The other one is obviously the vertical line. It's probably not going to be this smooth on a demand curve, but just to give you the general idea. This is an important piece, so stay that for a few minutes. Here we have three consumers, gasoline. We're going to assume that they all have the same car, but they may not have the same income and they may not have the same distance to drive to work. So let's assume that the other things, let's assume everything is being equal. Perhaps it's just their income that may affect how much gasoline they purchase. They work in the same place, work in the same neighborhood, but they may not have the same job. At $5 per gallon, you can see Jen is spending more. Perhaps Jen is making a little bit more, willing to go out even though gasoline is $5. As gasoline per gallon cost falls, you see all three start to consume more. At $1 a gallon, they're just out partying because that and other expenses have probably dropped. So there's a direct causation and correlation between the price of gasoline and usage. This is our demand. This is where we get the points for the demand curve. When we put them all together in an aggregate, this is what it would look like. It'd be one curve and not three. So we put together 200 buyers at $5 per gallon, 2,000 units, all the way up to $1 per gallon, and you can see it increases eightfold. The second is a change in the curve itself. Something else is going on. Some other happening has occurred that is creating this change. And there is a huge distinction that you will see in most of your tests. As you'll notice, our demand curve has shifted to the right, and it will also shift to the left. And we are on page 48, and we're still on slide 8, but we're just expanding it. There's a huge difference between a change on the demand curve and a change to the demand curve. A change on demand curve is point A and B moving up or down, meaning the cost of production or supply has increased the cost of gasoline. So the only concern we have is actually the cost of gasoline itself. Now, this is an important part, so I'm going to spend a little time on it so you understand the difference. A change along the D sub 1, is a change in demand based on price. A change to the demand curve, going left or right, is a change in something, in numerous things other than price. So gasoline would stay the same, let's say $3 a gallon, but something else is causing the curve to move left or right. Right generally is an increase, left is generally a decrease in the entire curve. It's got the same characteristics, the same slopes, it's just moved left or right. What do we mean by that? Gasoline is still $3 and we still have John, Jen, and James. Something else has caused the curve to move left or right. The entire curve, not a point on it. So that would be a change in demand. These are some of the things that actually change the demand. Taste in vehicles. Perhaps you're younger and you want a sporty car. You get a little older and you're not that impressed with the big engine and something of that nature. You haven't changed jobs. You just get you get a smaller car, a car with better fuel economy. The number of buyers in that particular area increase or decrease. Your income, as we said in the prior chapter, your income is a huge determinant of economic factors. And it is broken up into two pieces. One is a normal good, one is an inferior good. Sometimes a book will substitute the word superior, but we're going to go with what our publisher has. A normal good is what you buy based on your income. An inferior good is what you can afford. You give this good up as your income goes up. So, let's say you were making, again, $10 an hour. Through a little blood, sweat, and tears, you move up the corporate ladder, or you start your own company, whatever it is. Now you make $500,000 a year. Some of the things you bought, you're not going to buy anymore. They become inferior goods. What you're buying now, you consider that what you normally do, so this is a normal good. So, we'll imagine that you suddenly making $500,000 a year, you are probably going to be able to buy a bigger car if you so desire. Therefore, the demand for gasoline would move to the right. If it's a bad economic time and people are being laid off, you may get a little more conservative and you have to get a new car during this period, so you buy a smaller car just in case. So the demand for gasoline will shift to the left and go down. Other things that affect that. The price of a substitute. Coke and Pepsi. Again, don't send me any nasty grams in the comments section. Just deal with it. Complementary goods. Things that go together. And the price of one will affect the consumption of the other. Peanut butter and jelly. In the United States, that is a common sandwich to have. If the price of jelly goes up, and jelly may be used in a few more things, toast coming to mind, and this is the only time you buy jelly, the demand for jelly may fall. Pardon me, peanut butter. The price of jelly goes up, the demand for peanut butter may go down as a result. So that is a complementary good. Change in the customer's expectations. If you think the price is going to go up, you may consume a little bit more now. The old theory that during the holidays, price of gasoline will go up, so people tend to fuel or top off the tank now. You expect your income to go up. You know you're about to get a bonus at the end of the year, so you might be spending a little bit more. The next slide, 11, simply list out some scenarios. Change in taste, possibly because you're getting a little older. The number of buyers, more children, more toys. Your income goes up. You've been there a while. You've developed some skills. You're going to get a larger income. Again, price of related goods. I love this toner cartridge example because I think that is just a huge waste of the cost of toner cartridges. The printers are almost free. It's the toner cartridges that get you. And what what consumers expect. Again, if you think gasoline is going to go up because you read in the news that there's a strike somewhere, or there's some political upheaval where there might be a large oil producing nation, you might expect the gasoline price to go up. Therefore, you might start to stock up now. The other side, we've talked about demand. We all know about demand. We want something. We're all familiar with that. We're also familiar with supply. Now, we can think about this in a very broad aspects, and we are on page 51, leading to 52, that someone's making something. Back to you being a warehouse manager, you owning the Orange store, which makes cell phones, tablets, desktops, and things of that nature. So you are the one making the good. And just like with the demand, is this something the producer is willing and able to sell at a given price? Yes, in the demand, you'd want to sell it for $1. On the supply side, you want to sell it for 10. So looking at it from that side of the equation, we're going to do the same thing, but we're just looking at it from the standpoint of the person producing the good and or service. Remember, when you're in a job market, you are not the consumer. You are the supply side. You're selling your skill set to someone for a price. If you own the business and you're the one doing your manufacturing, then it's willing and able. But it also occurs while you're in college, you're trying to get a skill set to raise your availability and possibility of a larger income. So what are you willing and able to offer your services for? Are you willing to go $40 an hour, $50 an hour, $500 an hour? The market will tell you. Slide 13, the law of supply goes in the opposite direction of the law of demand. The laws of demand is an inverse relationship. The law of supply is closer to a one-to-one relationship, or it inclines. What price point will producers make the good? Because they have to have a cost involved. This is what it looks like. Our demand curve was declining. Our supply curve is inclining. And pretty much, as you would imagine, if you're the one who's offering the public coffee and the price is $1 and you sell 5 units, you raise the price to $2 and you actually start to sell more. What are you going to do? You're going to keep raising the price until you see something change. And if you raise the price to $5 and you sell more, you're going to keep going. Just like with the demand section, we're going to graph it from the individuals. Now we're going to put it into an aggregate. S1 is our aggregate. That is our supply curve. Points A and B represent a change in supply. A change on the supply curve. A change in supply itself is a result of something other than the price, once again. What we mean by this, if the curve were to move left or right, and you can see moving right once again is an increase in the supply, moving left is a decrease in supply. If something causes the curve itself to move left or right, it is something other than P or price. Everything else is just a change in the price on the original curve, which is S sub 1. If the curve moves to the point of S sub 3 or S sub 2, it's something other than price. In both instances, this is true. Some of the things that determine supply, again, tech being 40%. Resource prices. Has the supply chain been dismantled or disrupted? Taxes or political issues. The price of other goods, whether that be complementary or substitutes. Do you anticipate the price going up? Airlines tend to get into contracts where they think the price of aviation fuel will be and lock that in sometimes 6 months, possibly a year in advance. The number of sellers of the competition shrinks or expands. You start to make changes based on that. Going on to page 54, this is a list of some of the instances and what they mean. Gasoline being our primary target. If cheap crude oil is not available and it's going to cost more to drill for more crude oil to make gasoline, and the cost to get to it increases, then that cost will be passed on to the consumer. Changes in tech, taxes will affect it. High taxes on cigarettes. I think it is something along the lines of a $10 tax or more in Australia for cigarettes. It's huge. Moving on to the next set of examples. Again, complementary or substitute goods. If you expect the price to go up, you may figure out some way of actually trying to store it or have it locked into a different price or a set price via a contract. And the competition starts to go up or down. Equilibrium. Equilibrium is when the buyer and seller agree upon a price. The reason you need that, where you have equilibrium of price and quantity, is if you do not, you're going to have a problem. The problem is the producer may make more and no one's willing to pay for gasoline at $3, or say at $5 a gallon. You've processed and made too much. So you have all of that money spent into it, and you're going to have a loss. If you're selling gasoline for $1, and we'll say equilibrium is $3 in this case, you're still going to have a problem. You don't have enough. So in order for you to have an efficiency in how you allocate your resources or where you want to make stuff, what area, back to our analogy of if you are running the orange tech company, do you want to make a watch? Do you want to make a cell phone? Do you want to make tablets, desktops, laptops, any other devices, TVs? Well, you need to know where you have an agreeable price where you are willing and able to sell and the consumer is willing and able to buy. Then you can allocate your resources appropriately. What does that mean for all parties involved? Well, you're going to get what you want in the right quantity and the right price between both parties. You're going to work as effectively and efficiently as possible. You're going to try to produce a good product in the least costly method possible. Again, using the right mix of sources. where are you going to allocate your efforts? Are you going to put your best people in the most profitable area, making the most goods? Probably, and have them train others to actually expand where they're doing so there are no gaps. This is the first time that we see the two curves on the same graph. Now, equilibrium when they cross over is at $3 per gallon. Looking at this, if you raise the price to $4 a gallon, you're probably going to try to produce more because you believe that the market will bear it. So you need more units. However, if you look at from S1 to to D, or the demand curve, the demand is not at 10,000 units. It's at the demand at that point for $4 is where the demand should be for 2. That's what it means. You've made 10,000 units. The demand is actually 4. The same vein of, hey, you have a shortage, you're selling it for $2. Demand shoots up closer to 11. The supply is now 4. Enough people can't make a profit at that price. So it'll slowly go up to equilibrium. Then sometimes it will shoot over and too much is being made because everyone thinks there's a happy, joy consumers and they'll just buy it no matter what. And it will come back to equilibrium. Gasoline equilibrium changes quite quickly for many different reasons. Because, again, we have a large number of buyers and sellers, the price will constantly change in very volatile areas, gasoline being one. And you'll see this. You raise the price too quickly, you'll see a drop in demand. Lower it, and then you won't have enough on the shelves stocked up. What happens when we have a change in demand and supply? And we've gone past page 57, and we're on 58 and 59. 4 things can possibly happen. If there's an increase in demand, again, not based on price, but some other factor, we go from D sub 1 to D sub 2. Our demand curve changes. It still has the same shape, it just moves to the right and up. And just looking at this, we don't even need figures. What we can see is the supply and price will both go up. More people want it, you don't have as much, so you're going to make more and charge a little more. Change in demand. It decreases. The price is $5 a gallon. People don't want to spend that much. They start biking to work, taking public transportation. So the entire curve goes from D sub 3 to D sub 4. You notice the supply curve did not change. The price goes down and so does the quantity. You're not going to keep producing if there's no consumer market for it. Let's look at the supply side. Here's our equilibrium. You start to see the shift again. Our second shift, people want more. Something happens, there's a change in technology. It is cheaper to make, so you can make more, reduce the price, and the demand goes up. This normally happens in tech. The large flat screen TVs, when they initially came out, they could have been as much as $5,000. You can find a pretty big screen, bigger than the original ones that were out, for under $1,000. Technology has made it cheaper, more efficient, more effective. They don't consume as much energy. You can tell because they're not generating a lot of heat. You can put your hand in front of a large monitor. 10 years ago, it would give off a lot of heat. They don't now. So you can increase the quantity. You can lower the price. Therefore, the demand would go up. The opposite, if you have some supply chain issues, back to the pandemic of COVID of 2020, 2021, all of a sudden you do not have computer chips and you can't get your cars produced. There was a car shortage, a new car shortage. So what do? There's an increase in demand for new cars, the ones that do have chips. The demand truly hasn't changed that much. It's based on the supply and the availability. So the price per unit of car goes up and the number of cars available has gone down. This interesting chart on the bottom of page 59. If you will notice, first two lines moving in opposite directions, supply and demand. The price is actually affected by demand. You don't know where the equilibrium will be, but you know the price. If the demand goes down, so will the price. If they're moving in opposite directions, supply and demand. If the change in demand increases, so will the price. You just don't know where the equilibrium will be, because those who are on the supply side may change. Lines 3 and 4, they're moving in the same direction. Price you don't know, but the quantity again follows demand. If there are more TVs, laptops, and computers, and demand increases, price, as we can see, the price for flat screen TVs has decreased dramatically. The price for storage, flash drives, and the amount of terabytes you can get now has decreased. In theory, the quantity should decrease because they're cheaper to make in their increase in demand. If supply and demand both drop, the price may not necessarily drop. There are fewer people who want it, but there are fewer suppliers. But the quantity is definitely not going to go up. Looking at this from a global perspective, talking about the average price of a loaf of bread, just to give you an idea. Again, if you're trying to figure out why the price of gasoline and other things go up and down, this is an excellent chapter to get an understanding. It's based on supply and demand. More complex chapter, which is why we're going to go over a little bit over, trying to keep that under 25 minutes or so. But again, this is the building blocks of everything else. Sometimes the prices get out of line and the government tries to step in, setting what is known as a price ceiling and a price floor. A ceiling refers to just how high they're going to let the price go. Now, if equilibrium is $3 and the government says you can't sell gasoline over $10 a gallon, it's not a problem. It becomes a problem if the equilibrium price is $3 and the government says you cannot sell gasoline above $2 a gallon. It's set a ceiling of $2. Well, at that price point, you may not have a lot of people who are willing to buy it, who are willing to produce it, because it's cost prohibitive. There may be producers who break even at $2.50. At $2, they don't even open the doors. An example of this is rent control. Again, probably go look that up because it's going to take a little while to cover that, so I don't want to keep you here all day. Illustration, there's our equilibrium point. And the government is putting a price ceiling, meaning it does not go above $3. As you can see, the supply is well below what the demand point is. You have a shortage, and if you remember on that last slide, what you have is the black market. Price floor. A price floor works in a slightly Similar manner, but in a different direction. Let's go back to that equilibrium and we'll say this is milk. Equilibrium price, supply and demand, meet at, say, $3 per gallon. Well, for the sake of argument, let's say milk hasn't been doing well and the government sets in a price floor to support the poor farmers who are making milk. The price floor means it does not drop below that, like you're standing on the floor, is $5. Let's make it bigger. Let's say it's $10. A gallon of milk is $10. Do you know what is going to happen? Everyone who has a dog, a cat, a goldfish will change them all out for cows. They'll look it up and it only costs $2.50 to get a gallon of milk from a cow. That includes everything involved, feeding, veterinarian bills, everything. So you have a plethora of people who now own cows who think they're going to get $10 a gallon for milk, assuming that you can package it and sell it yourself. You have an excess of supply, but no demand. So this is the problem you run into when you have a price floor above equilibrium. And the classic example in econ is the minimum wage. The argument is if there is no minimum wage, a federal mandate of what the floor is, people were actually being harmed or priced out, because there may be people who are willing to work for, let's say, $5 an hour, but they're not going to get the job because at the time of this recording, federal minimum wage is $7.50. I had to get some tea. This is what it looks like. There's our equilibrium, and it is above equilibrium. Now, some of you may have noticed a floor only comes into effect if it is above equilibrium. The ceiling only comes into effect when it is below equilibrium. Not in the ways you're thinking. Again, you may want to look at a couple of illustrations on YouTube to explain it in a little more detail. The visual aids work better here. All right then. We have come to the end. Pandemic prices causing equilibrium to be thrown out the window, and you see shocks due to the effect of the hampered supply curve. In the United States, there was a mass rush to buy toilet paper. I don't know why. There wasn't a shortage of toilet paper. All of a sudden, there was this mass rush for toilet paper created it. I have no idea how that happened, but it was an interesting story for a good 2 months. All right, then. That ends Chapter 3. As always, study hard, do some practice, talk to your instructor if you're just enjoying this just because you're curious. Thank you. Feel free to do all that stuff, like, share, etc., etc. Helps other people find the information. All right. Be good. I'll see you in the next one.